All right, ready to dive into something kind of out there.
Always. What we got?
Well, today it's autism, and wait for it, telepathy.
Ooh, telepathy. Now that sounds intriguing.
I know, right? Might sound a little, well, fringe at first glance.
Definitely not our usual territory.
But hang on, because we're not talking about, actual mind reading.
Yeah, no spoons bending or anything like that.
This deep dive is inspired by an article, actually. From Cheap ABA, it's called Autism and Telepathy, Understanding Unique Connections.
Autism and telepathy. Interesting title.
Yeah, and the whole telepathy thing is more of a metaphor, really.
Yeah.
A way to think about how autistic people experience the world, especially when it comes to communication.
Ah, okay. So we're using telepathy as a way to understand those unique ways autistic individuals communicate and interpret things. Makes sense.
Right, and it gets pretty fascinating.
I bet. So, where do we start with this telepathy metaphor?
Well, the article's not suggesting anyone's, sending thoughts across a room or anything.
Yeah, all right.
It's more about the incredible sensitivity that many autistic people have. They pick up on nonverbal cues, emotions, even sensory information that most people might miss. Like they're tuned into a different frequency.
That's interesting. So it's not about literal mind reading, but more like a heightened sensitivity, a superpower of observation.
See, exactly, like having a sixth sense for social dynamics.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. And the article, does it actually go into debunking the telepathy myth as a superpower?
Oh, absolutely. It dives into how these heightened sensitivities can lead to, well, some really unique communication styles.
Ah, that makes sense. Because on one hand, there's this perception that autistic people might struggle with social interaction.
Right. But then you also hear about this incredible ability to read people, almost like they have emotional X-ray vision.
It's like a paradox, isn't it?
Totally. And the article addresses that head on.
How so?
Well, it talks about how autistic individuals often excel at interpreting those nonverbal cues, body language, facial expressions, even tiny shifts in tone of voice, things many of us are just, well, oblivious to.
So they're seeing the full picture, the uncut version of human interaction, while the rest of us are just catching the highlights.
That's a great way to put it. They're getting the director's cut, the behind-the-scenes insights.
And because of that, they're able to develop a deeper understanding of people's feelings, even if those feelings aren't, like, directly spoken.
Exactly. They're sensing the undercurrents, the stuff beneath the surface.
Wow, that's really insightful. And this is probably a good place to point out that despite being so tuned into nonverbal cues, many autistic people actually prefer direct communication.
Now, that is interesting. Why would someone so good at reading between the lines prefer things to be straightforward? It's like,
It seems counterintuitive, right? But it makes sense when you think about it. It's not that they're not aware of emotions. It's more about wanting to avoid misunderstandings.
I see. So if you're constantly bombarded with subtle, maybe even conflicting signals, direct communication is almost like a relief.
Right. It's a way to make sure everyone's on the same page to minimize the potential for confusion.
It's like, just tell me what you mean. No need to decode a secret message.
Exactly. The article actually quotes it as a desire for clarity and honesty in interactions.
Makes sense. So it's not a deficit in understanding emotions, it's a different approach. A way to navigate a world that can be super overwhelming, both socially and sensorially.
You got it. And that brings us to the heart of this deep dive, really. Understanding these different communication styles is key for connecting with autistic individuals.
So how do we bridge that understanding? What are the things we can do?
That's the million-dollar question. And the article actually has some pretty solid advice, a real call to action. It encourages us to.
Hold on. This is a great place to pause. Don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back with even more insights from this fascinating article on autism and telepathy. Okay, we're back. Ready to get into those takeaways for bridging the understanding gap when it comes to communicating with autistic individuals.
Absolutely.
What's the first step?
Well, it all starts with creating spaces where everyone feels, safe to express themselves, no matter their communication style.
Okay, so it's about fostering open dialogue.
Yeah. And remembering that communication's a two-way street. We got to be open to different ways of communicating and understanding instead of, like, imposing our own expectations.
It's like building a more inclusive environment.
Yeah.
Where everyone feels seen and heard. It's like
Yeah. Imagine a round table where everyone has a voice, and where everyone's way of communicating is valued. That's the kind of space we're aiming for.
I like that. A round table of understanding. So how do we actually build that table? What are the concrete steps?
Well, the article really emphasizes active listening.
Active listening. Okay, so paying attention.
More than just listening to the words, though. It's also paying attention to, body language, tone of voice, those nonverbal cues.
Right, becoming a communication detective, trying to piece together all the subtle clues to understand what's really being communicated.
Exactly. It's like learning a new language, one that goes beyond words and gets into those nuances of nonverbal expression.
So we're tuning into a whole new frequency.
That's a great way to put it. And this is a skill we can all benefit from, by the way, not just when interacting with autistic individuals.
Right, it's about becoming more aware and attuned to the full spectrum of communication. It's like we're expanding our communication bandwidth.
I like that, expanding our bandwidth. And another thing the article reminds us is to be mindful of our own nonverbal cues.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. We probably don't even realize how much we're saying without actually saying anything.
Exactly, a raised eyebrow, a nervous fidget, even just how we're standing.
Right. And for someone who's super sensitive to those cues, like many autistic individuals are, those unspoken messages can be really powerful.
Absolutely. So it's like a two-way mirror, right? We're trying to understand how others are communicating with us, but we also need to be aware of how we're communicating with them.
Creating that reciprocal understanding, it's about building bridges, not walls.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've covered a lot here, debunking the myth of telepathy, exploring those unique communication styles, and now these practical steps. It's a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is. Lots to think about.
What's the biggest takeaway? What's that aha moment you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that even though we may not be literally sending thoughts across a room, the way autistic individuals perceive and process information offers really valuable lessons for all of us in communication and empathy, for everyone.
Right, by recognizing and respecting those differences, we can create a more inclusive, a more harmonious society, really, where everyone feels seen, heard, and understood.
Well said.
It's like we're all part of this giant symphony, each playing our own unique instrument. And the magic comes from the harmony of those differences.
That's a great analogy.
So we've talked a lot about the telepathy metaphor and communication styles, but the article also brings up another important aspect related to communication: sensory sensitivities.
Yeah, you're right. Sensory sensitivities, it's something that's often overlooked when we think about communication.
But it's super important.
It is. It plays a huge role in how autistic individuals experience the world, and that, of course, impacts communication.
Right, so things like fluorescent lights, certain textures, those kinds of things. I've read they can be super overwhelming for some autistic folks.
Yeah, imagine, a world where sounds feel amplified, where bright lights are blinding, textures that feel, like nails on a chalkboard.
Wow, that's intense. I can see how that could be really challenging.
Right, and these sensory experiences, they can make it difficult to communicate, to interact with others, sometimes even just to be in certain environments.
It makes you realize just how much we take for granted,
Yeah.
when it comes to our own senses. So how can we be more aware of and accommodating to these sensitivities, especially in social settings?
That's where mindful communication comes in, I think. Being tuned in to not just what we're saying, but also to the environment where we're saying it.
Makes sense.
It's like, the article encourages us to create sensory-friendly spaces, dim the lights, minimize background noise, even offer a quiet space for someone to go to if they're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's like those autism-friendly movie screenings. They dim the lights, lower the sound, even allow movement during the film.
Exactly. Simple adjustments, but they can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And those adjustments can go beyond the physical space, too.
Right, like maybe being mindful of strong perfumes, or just being aware of the volume of our voice. Even asking someone directly about their sensory preferences can be helpful.
So being considerate, observant, and willing to adapt.
Exactly. Recognizing that everyone experiences the world a little differently, What might be comfortable for one person could be really overwhelming for someone else.
And it goes beyond just accommodating others.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about being aware of how sensory input affects us, all of us.
Yeah, we can all benefit from creating spaces and interactions that are just more mindful of sensory sensitivities, for sure.
I'm noticing a common thread here: empathy, awareness, challenging our assumptions about what normal communication even means.
Yeah, I see it too.
And if we circle back to that telepathy metaphor,
Right back to where we started.
it might not be so far-fetched after all.
You might be onto something there.
Maybe we all have that potential for deep understanding, for that intuitive connection.
That sixth sense for communication.
Maybe it's not supernatural, just a deeper level of empathy a willingness to really see and hear each other.
I love it.
And speaking of seeing and hearing each other, the article also touches on this idea of neurodiversity.
Ah, neurodiversity. It's a crucial concept.
So it's the idea that, neurological differences, like autism, they're not deficits, but rather variations,
Right,
right?
exactly. Variations in how our brains are wired.
Not a problem to be solved.
Yeah, it's a shift in perspective. Moving away from seeing autism as something to be cured or fixed, it's about celebrating those unique strengths and challenges that come with being neurodivergent.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Recognizing that there's no one right way to experience the world or to communicate.
I agree. And embracing those differences, those neurodiversities, that can lead to a richer, more vibrant society for everyone.
I love that you brought up neurodiversity because it really ties back to everything we've been talking about today.
Right. Different doesn't mean deficient. It means we all have a lot to learn from each other.
Exactly. Challenging assumptions, expanding what normal even means, and just embracing the beauty of human variation.
So well said.
So how do we translate this idea, this concept of neurodiversity into action? How do we go from just knowing it to actually living it?
That's a big question, one that probably deserves its own deep dive. But for now, I think the most important thing is to start with a shift in mindset.
A mindset shift. Okay, I'm listening. What does that look like?
It starts with recognizing that, autistic individuals, they're not puzzles to be solved or problems to be fixed.
Right. Yeah.
They're individuals, with their own unique perspectives, talents, ways of being in the world.
So not trying to fit them into a box labeled normal.
Nope. We need to create a world that celebrates their individuality.
And it's more than just tolerance, right?
Right. It's about genuine appreciation. Recognizing that those things that make autistic individuals different are often the very things that make them brilliant, Innovative, insightful.
It's like Temple Grandin, the animal scientist who's also autistic.
Oh, that's a great example.
She's talked about how her way of thinking, her unique sensory experiences have given her incredible insight into animal behavior.
Yeah, and she said it herself, neurodiversity is not a limitation, it's a source of strength and potential. It's like we're all pieces of a giant mosaic, each with our own unique shape and color. And it's the combination of those differences that makes the masterpiece.
That is beautiful. And it makes me wonder if by embracing neurodiversity, we're not just making things better for autistic people, but unlocking something amazing for everyone. Like we're tapping into a hidden superpower.
I think you're right. By valuing different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing the world, we open ourselves up to new possibilities.
New solutions, new ways of being.
Yeah, exactly. It's like expanding the boundaries of what's possible.
And if we come back to that telepathy metaphor,
Right circle.
maybe it wasn't so out there after all.
Maybe not.
Not about literal mind reading, but about that deeper understanding, that sensitivity to the nuances of communication.
So we're not just talking about autism.
Right. It's a whole new way to think about human connection, a more mindful, more empathetic, more inclusive way of being in the world.
I like how you put that, and it makes this whole deep dive even more impactful, right?
Totally. It's not just about understanding autism. It's about understanding ourselves and our relationships and just how we communicate as humans.
It's all connected.
I'm starting to think that this telepathy idea, while not literally true, it might be pointing to a deeper truth about how we connect with each other.
What do you mean?
Like maybe we all have that potential for deep understanding, that intuitive connection.
I like where you're going with this.
Maybe it's not about supernatural powers, but about empathy, about really truly seeing and hearing each other.
So instead of differences being barriers,
They become bridges.
bridges to connection and understanding. That's beautiful.
And a great thought to leave our listeners with: the world is full of different ways of being. And embracing those differences, well, that makes life richer, more meaningful for all of us.
Couldn't have said better myself.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into autism and telepathy. It might have seemed a little strange at first,
I'll admit I was a little skeptical at the beginning.
but we discovered there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Absolutely. Always more to learn about ourselves, about each other.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Hopefully you picked up some new insights, some new perspectives, and maybe even, a little bit of wonder about the world and the people in it.
Yeah. And keep the conversation going. Keep exploring. Keep asking questions. Keep connecting with each other.
Who knows what you'll discover. Till next time, Stay curious, everyone.